welcome to the deep dive. You've given us a really interesting mix of material, articles, your own notes, even this like well-thumbed art instruction book. It all seems to point towards one thing, using art journaling as a way to, well, explore yourself and break through those really frustrating creative roadblocks.
Exactly. And our goal, our mission really in this deep dive is to go through all of this stuff and pull out the most valuable insights for you. We want to offer a clear understanding of how art journaling can be a powerful tool, especially if you've ever felt completely stuck staring at a blank page.
Because that feeling of wanting to create but just hitting a wall, it's incredibly frustrating.
Yeah.
But what's so compelling, I think, across these sources is this central idea that even if you don't, like, consider yourself an artist, even if your last art project was probably finger painting back in kindergarten,
Right.
art journaling can be a surprisingly effective way to unlock your creativity, work through your emotions, and understand yourself a bit better.
Yeah.
These sources really look at both the psychological reasons why this works and give you practical ways to actually get started.
Absolutely. It's kind of a holistic approach, isn't it? Looking at how this practice benefits both your mind and your creative spirit.
Okay, let's dive in then. The material really kicks off with the author's own experience, a point in her art career where she basically just came to a standstill. She applied to an art group, I think, and got rejected because her work supposedly lacked a consistent style. Can you imagine how disheartening that would be?
Yeah.
It really just took the wind out of her creative sails.
Oh, yeah. That kind of external criticism,
Mhm.
it can be crippling.
And the key takeaway here, it seems, is how easily that kind of thing can just cripple our creative confidence, leading to the cycle of self-doubt and, well, inaction.
It's a sadly common experience for so many people who try to create anything, really. That kind of external judgment can get so deeply internalized. It leads to self-doubt and a kind of paralysis where even just looking at your art supplies feels overwhelming. The sources really highlight this paradox, that inner sense of creative potential is still bubbling under the surface. But this powerful self-doubt and even a tendency to sort of sabotage your own efforts takes over. It's like your
Yeah.
inner artist is desperately trying to get out, but another part of you is just slamming the door shut.
And she really struggled with that feeling of emptiness, that big white, as the text you shared puts it, meaning page in Russian, for those who don't know. Even when ideas would flicker, she felt frozen by indecision. And if she did manage to create something, especially with her usual oil paints, her like go-to reaction was to scrape it all off, to just destroy it.
Yeah.
That feeling of wanting to just obliterate what you've started when it doesn't feel right, that probably resonates with a lot of us.
Oh, definitely. It speaks directly to that fear of imperfection, right? That ingrained belief that everything has to be perfect right from the very start. But what's fascinating here is that even amidst all that self-doubt, the author recognized this inner wellspring of ideas, these like new forms and colors in her imagination.
Right.
She just couldn't seem to connect that vibrant inner world with what she was actually managing to put on canvas. It's that disconnect, that gap between our rich inner landscape and the perceived limitations of our abilities that so often fuels creative stagnation.
So how did she start to break free from that? It mentioned she began sketching in a sketchbook without any real intention, just this sort of nonverbal stream of consciousness. But even that initially felt like a struggle, like she's fighting against something.
Yes, that initial resistance is often part of the process, isn't it? It's like trying to start a car that's been sitting idle for a long time. You got to crank it a few times. But the crucial thing is that she kept exploring. The sources then point to these really important influences that helped her develop her particular approach. We see Stephen Nachmanovich's Free Play, which introduces this idea of improvisation and the inherent creativity within that.
Okay.
Then those expressive painting workshops with Michelle Cassou and Stuart Cubley, and this rediscovery of the simple joy of materials like squirrel brushes and tempera paints. It's almost like going back to a more childlike, less inhibited way of creating.
And then the philosophical and psychological ideas start to come into play, right?
Yeah.
Joseph Campbell's encouragement to follow your bliss, Carl Jung's concepts around the power of imagery, and that workshop on active imagination. It sounds like she was really drawing from a pretty diverse set of thinkers to understand what was happening with her own creativity.
Yeah, active imagination, think of it like a guided daydream where you intentionally engage with the images that pop into your mind.
Interesting.
Precisely. It's that realization that this isn't just about solving art problems, it's about a broader approach to living and working creatively every single day. Whether you're, painting a masterpiece or just putting together a presentation for work.
Right.
The sources emphasize that this inherent creativity isn't just for artists with a capital A, it's a fundamental human capacity. And just like any skill, it needs to be practiced and nurtured. So, drawing on these diverse influences, the author went on to develop and refine her approach over 30 years of teaching, witnessing its power in the lives of others.
Which makes those examples she shares so compelling. Carla, the book editor who used art journaling to navigate the stress before her wedding and to overcome writer's block, that really shows how this can help with very real everyday challenges. And then the scientists, Jeff and Doris, using it to clear mental clutter and even explain complex ideas in a simple way. That's a fascinating application, using the visual to clarify abstract thought.
Yeah, Jeff's I don't care mantra, paired with a shrug, that's such a brilliant little tool, isn't it, for short-circuiting that self-doubt right in the moment.
Totally.
And Doris using the narrative aspect of drawing to make complicated ideas accessible, that really speaks to the power of visual communication.
What's also interesting early on is the brief mention of the limbic system, the cingulate gyrus, hippocampus, and amygdala. Specifically, the amygdala's role in, scanning for danger. It's like a subtle hint of what's to come later in terms of overcoming fear in the creative process.
Right. It reminds us that our brains are fundamentally wired for survival, and sometimes that survival instinct can manifest as creative inhibition. It's like, is this blank page really a threat? Well, maybe to our ego it is.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so building on the author's personal experience, let's now delve into the core principles that kind of underpin this whole art journaling for self-discovery thing. This idea of mistake-free drawing, that everything you create has value. That can be a really revolutionary idea for those of us who are just so used to judging our creative output.
It's a really fundamental shift in how you look at creating, isn't it? The sources emphasize that self-criticism is the ultimate creativity killer, just shuts it right down. Real change and real breakthroughs require giving yourself permission to be messy, to experiment without that immediate internal judgment.
So it's about reframing what we think of as a mistake.
Exactly. Seeing it instead as an unexpected turn, an opportunity to look at what you've done from a new perspective, maybe go in a different direction entirely.
And the focus on the process rather than the end result, that's so important, isn't it? It's about the act of creating itself, the exploration, and not necessarily about producing, a gallery-worthy piece every single time you open your journal.
Right. The real value is in engaging with the materials, in that spontaneous expression, in that direct connection between your inner world and what appears on the page. The sources also highlight how deeply personal art journaling is. It's about building your own unique experience, your own visual language. There's no single right or wrong way to approach it.
It's fascinating that they connect this idea of playful exploration in sketchbooks to historical figures like Leonardo da Vinci, Chagall, Frida Kahlo, and even Tim Burton. It reminds you that this isn't some, new agey trend. It's a practice that creative minds have used for centuries.
Absolutely. These weren't just about creating polished masterpieces. They were spaces for experimentation, for working through ideas visually, without the pressure of a final perfect product.
The concept of spontaneous drawing as a form of improvisation and play is also emphasized as absolutely vital for human development. Just think about children, their completely uninhibited creativity. That's kind of the spirit we're trying to recapture, maybe.
Definitely. And the yes and principle from improvisation, being open to new ideas and building upon them without immediate judgment, that's such a powerful concept to bring into the creative process. Instead of shutting down an idea because it doesn't fit your initial vision, you embrace it and see where it might lead.
It's about fostering that sense of flow, that willingness to let the creation evolve in its own way. And then there's the idea of using mantras as a way to quiet that inner critic, their voice of resistance.
Yeah.
Phrases like, I hear you, but right now I'm going to try another way.
Yeah, it's a gentle but firm way of acknowledging that self-doubt without letting it take over the whole show. That's a really practical tip, I think.
Okay, now the material also delves into the neuroscience behind improvisation, referencing the research by Charles Limb and Alan Braun with jazz musicians in fMRI machines. What were the key findings there that are relevant to our creativity in general?
Well, what's so interesting is that the scans showed a decrease in activity in the brain areas associated with self-monitoring and inhibition during improvisation,
Okay.
while the areas linked to self-expression were more active. So the science actually backs this up, silencing that inner critic isn't just a nice idea, it actually changes how your brain functions, allowing for more fluid creativity.
Wow. And they also found a heightened state of awareness in the sensory areas of the brain, right? Almost like a heightened focus on the present moment of creation.
Exactly. And they make the important point that while this research focused on music, this kind of improvisational brain activity isn't limited to musicians. It's actually fundamental to human survival, to problem solving in the moment, to everyday communication, even.
And the sources even suggest that without this kind of inherent creativity, humanity wouldn't have survived. It's really seen as a core part of who we are.
And the hope is to continue exploring this kind of brain activity in other creative areas like writing and visual arts. But the main takeaway is clear. When you can quiet that internal critic, you unlock the freedom of improvisation, which is so important for fostering creativity in any field.
Okay, so you're feeling inspired, you want to get started, but the environment you create for yourself really matters, doesn't it? The sources discuss creating the right space, even using the term taminos, a sacred space.
Yes, the idea of having a dedicated, quiet workspace, a sacred space, is really about creating a container for your creativity. It's a place where you feel safe and inspired, where you can step away from the usual distractions, the phone, the emails, and allow your focus to really deepen.
And silence during your art journaling is emphasized like no background music. That might be a challenge for some people who are used to having something playing while they work.
Yeah, the reasoning behind the silence is quite deliberate, actually. We live in a world that's constantly bombarding us with external stimuli. Music, while enjoyable, also has a really strong emotional impact, right? When you're art journaling for self-discovery, the goal is to let your own inner images and feelings emerge naturally, without being filtered or influenced by external emotional cues like music. It's about really tuning into your own internal rhythm.
Got it. Now let's get into the practical side, getting started with your materials.
Yeah.
The sources suggest a surprisingly simple approach, especially when you're first starting out. A basic watercolor set with pan watercolors, not tubes. Why that specific recommendation?
Well, the focus on pan watercolors is really about making it as easy and accessible as possible. Tube watercolors can involve more mixing, deciding how much paint, how much water, and that can feel overwhelming for beginners, potentially leading to frustration if you don't immediately get the colors you want.
Right, another potential roadblock.
Exactly. The idea is to remove those initial obstacles and keep the focus on simply making marks on the page. Even the suggestion to set aside white paint for later kind of reinforces this idea of keeping it simple at first.
And the importance of keeping that mop brush nice and wet, really feeling its softness on the paper, and also having a smaller, less flexible detail brush. It's almost like they're encouraging a physical connection with the materials themselves.
Absolutely. It's about developing a feel for your tools, understanding how they respond to your touch. The wetness of the mop brush allows for those smooth flowing marks, while the smaller brush gives you more control for finer details later on. Having both provides versatility without overcomplicating things.
And the other basic supplies a wide mouth container for water, paper towels, and a large sheet of paper to protect your workspace. They're all about creating a practical and comfortable setup. Makes sense.
Then there's the somewhat unexpected suggestion to draw on both sides of the journal page. That might go against what some people think of as, preserving their precious art.
Uh-huh. Yeah, but that's a very deliberate choice, isn't it? To reduce the pressure around the final product. By using both sides, it makes each individual page feel less precious and encourages a more experimental, less inhibited approach. In the beginning, it's more about quantity and exploration rather than striving for perfection on every single sheet.
And the recommendation to date your entries at the end, that's a clever way to avoid the fear of painting over the date, and further emphasizes that the process is ongoing and nothing is truly finished in a static way.
Exactly. It keeps your focus on the present moment of creating rather than on documenting a past event that has to be preserved untouched. Okay, now we come to the blank page. That can be a really intimidating space for anyone. The sources acknowledge this fear of the blank page and offer a wonderfully simple exercise. Put a dot.
That put a dot exercise, also known as diampha in Chinese painting, is brilliant in its simplicity, isn't it? It's about befriending your brush and paint without the pressure of having to create a specific image. It's just a way to break through that initial inertia and just make a physical connection with your materials. As one of her teachers said, it's about making friends with the brush.
I like that. And again, the emphasis on not getting hung up on color selection right away. The idea is that all colors are equal at this stage. The main goal is just to maintain flow, to keep moving. Just pick the first color that you feel drawn to, basically.
Right, that initial hesitation over which color to choose, even if it's just for a second, can often signal deeper creative blocks. By consciously bypassing that and simply picking a color, you're kind of training yourself to overcome that resistance and trust the process.
The sources then stress that the process should feel simple and easy, and that more complex techniques like color mixing can actually be a distraction in the beginning. It also cautions against this common idea of happy colors automatically leading to happy pictures, pointing out that our preferences for colors are something we actually learn. That's a really interesting point.
It really challenges those ingrained associations we have. Just because blue is often linked to sadness doesn't mean using blue in your art journal will automatically create a sad picture, or that you have to use yellow to feel happy. Color preference is largely based on cultural and personal experiences that we've learned over time. The key is to explore color without those pre-existing limitations.
And this leads to the idea of exploring your own inner palette, really questioning those automatic color associations. There's a simple exercise suggested, drawing a loose, free-flowing pattern with black ink, and then just coloring in the enclosed areas with different colors to encourage a sense of playfulness. That sounds like a fun way to break away from those mental color rules.
It is. It's about disrupting those automatic color associations and allowing for a more intuitive and less judgmental exploration of your own inner landscape of color. Just seeing what happens.
Okay, now let's move on to this idea of drawing without a plan. This seems to be a really central idea in this whole approach, starting without a specific idea or expectation to create that environment where there are truly no mistakes.
Yeah.
But that can feel really uncomfortable for those of us who, like to have a clear goal in mind before we start anything.
It's about letting go of control, isn't it? At least in the initial stages. By not trying to depict something specific, you bypass that internal editor that's constantly judging whether you're getting it right. It's about allowing the image to emerge organically, guided by your intuition rather than some preconceived notion.
And this paradox they mentioned that sometimes the more you learn, the more you can feel like you actually know less. That really hits home. It's like the more you understand the complexities of something, the more you realize how much you don't know.
Exactly. But the sources suggest that acknowledging that not knowing is perfectly okay and can even be beneficial, can actually lead to a broader perspective and open up new avenues for creative exploration. The anecdote they share about Rob struggling to draw a mouth perfectly really illustrates how those fixed ideas can actually hinder your creative flow.
Yeah, he got stuck on the details.
Right. And this idea of not holding on too tightly to specific desires in your creative work, allowing for different aspects of yourself, the playful side, the more serious side, maybe even a darker side, to emerge without judgment. That's a really powerful concept, giving yourself permission to explore all those different facets of your inner world through your art.
It's about embracing the full spectrum of your inner landscape, not just the parts you deem acceptable or artistic. The comparison to children's uninhibited creativity is so important here. They create without worrying about whether it's good or bad. And as adults, we can learn so much from that inherent freedom.
There's a very simple exercise introduced here, just drawing a line on the paper and letting your brush lead the way, really focusing on the present moment as you do it. It has a very zen-like quality to it, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. It's about getting out of your head and really into the physical sensation of the brush moving across the paper, allowing the line to become its own journey without a predetermined destination.
And then taking those abstract marks and lines that you've created and actively looking for recognizable images within them, the guessing clouds exercise. It emphasizes that any image that emerges for you is valid, even if it seems really simple or silly.
This exercise is all about activating your visual imagination, your natural ability to see patterns and make connections. It really reinforces the idea that there are no mistakes in this process, only potential images waiting to be discovered within those abstract marks you've made. It encourages a playful interaction with what might just seem like the accidental.
It seems like the sources really prioritize these emerging images over the initial abstract lines, unless you specifically want to incorporate those lines into a new image you're creating. Why is there that preference for focusing on the images that you find?
Well, the sources explain that images are the nonverbal language of art and storytelling. They connect much more directly to our inner world, to our own personal library of images, as it's described. While abstract marks certainly have their own value and can be expressive, images tend to resonate more deeply on a personal level and can often unlock deeper meanings and insights into what's going on within you.
And that directly addresses that common feeling of, I can't draw, right? Because the main goal here isn't about creating realistic representations of things. It's really about tapping into that inner imagery, that very personal visual vocabulary that we all have.
Exactly. The comparison they make to a child's early attempts at writing is really apt. It's about the process of forming those initial visual letters and words. It's about developing your own unique visual language, even if it's not technically perfect in a traditional sense. The focus is on expression and exploration, not on achieving some particular level of artistic skill.
The sources then briefly touch on the different roles of the left and right hemispheres of the brain, with the right brain being more involved in processing images and making connections, and the left brain focusing more on details, organization, language, and narrative. How does understanding this help when it comes to art journaling?
Well, it helps you understand that both sides of your brain are involved. But in the initial stages of spontaneous drawing, you're primarily engaging your right brain's capacity for visual thinking and making those intuitive connections. Your left brain's more analytical and language-oriented functions can sometimes get in the way of that initial free flow of creativity. Art journaling in this way can help to create a better balance and allow that right brain to take the lead, at least for a while.
Now, they introduce an exercise for intentionally evoking images, choosing a particular feeling or mood that you're experiencing, and then selecting a simple symbol that represents that feeling to draw, even if it feels like a very ordinary or, cliche symbol. What's the purpose behind this more directed approach?
This exercise is about consciously creating a link between your internal emotional landscape and external visual representations. By choosing a specific feeling and then a related symbol, you're essentially starting a visual dialogue between your inner state and the world of imagery. The prompts that encourage you to reflect on whether that initial mood shifted as you were drawing and if any new feelings or related images came up,
Right.
really highlighting that dynamic interplay between our emotions and how we express them visually. And it emphasizes that even these simple symbols are valuable for learning how to translate feelings into images, and that often this exercise can trigger unexpected feelings or memories beyond that initial emotion you chose.
That really points to the power of the unconscious at work, doesn't it? It's about acknowledging and exploring the nuances of your emotional world through the act of drawing, recognizing that our feelings are often complex and can shift and evolve as we engage with them creatively.
The importance of taking a gentle approach is then discussed, being kind and patient with your creative efforts without becoming overly cautious or rigid. That sounds like a really delicate balance to try and achieve.
It is. It's about finding that middle ground where you're engaged and focused, but not tense or overly critical. The analogy they use of a gymnast finding their balance or a singer focusing on the music without straining their voice really captures this idea. It's about being present with the process without trying to force a particular outcome.
And the text mentions that often when we feel resistance towards new creative impulses, that resistance comes from our analytical mind. So how do we learn to navigate that internal resistance?
By acknowledging it without giving it too much power, really. The example they share of Doris, who initially felt like she wanted to destroy her artwork, but then transformed that feeling into drawing bombs and rockets, is a really powerful illustration of this. Instead of suppressing that negative feeling, she channeled it into a visual form, which eventually led to a more positive image.
So she worked with it.
Exactly. It's about finding a way to work with that resistance to transform its energy, rather than just fighting against it.
So experiencing strong emotions during the creative process isn't necessarily a bad sign then.
Not at all. They can often signal that you're on the verge of a breakthrough, uncovering a new idea or a deeper level of self-understanding. Learning to navigate these strong emotions with patience and gentleness is absolutely key to allowing those breakthroughs to happen. The analogy they use of mindful eating, really paying attention to your body's signals rather than just being critical of what you're eating, helps to illustrate this. It's about tuning into the authentic messages of your creative process.
The sources then suggest asking yourself open-ended questions about the figures or elements that appear in your artwork to encourage a deeper level of engagement and to potentially uncover unexpected ideas. It's almost like having a conversation with your own creations.
Exactly. It's about fostering a sense of curiosity and exploration towards what's emerging on the page. By asking questions like, what is this figure trying to do? Or what kind of story might this object tell? You can unlock hidden meanings and develop a richer understanding of what's coming from your subconscious.
And this idea of finding the upside of creative blocks, using them as starting points for completely new images, comparing it to the principles of Aikido where you use your opponent's force against them, That's a really empowering perspective.
It completely reframes creative blocks, doesn't it? Not as dead ends, but as potential starting points for something new. Just like in Aikido, where you redirect your opponent's energy, you can use the energy of that feeling of being blocked to generate new ideas and images. Actively drawing that monster critic or those negative feelings is a very concrete way to disarm them.
The material then delves into the phenomenon of insight, that sudden aha moment, and connects it to bursts of gamma wave activity in the brain. Can you explain that connection a little more?
Certainly. The research by John Cunios and Mark Jung Beeman really distinguishes between the kind of problem solving that's very analytical and step by step, and that moment of sudden insight, that flash of understanding that seems to come out of nowhere. What they found using EEG is that right at the moment of insight, there's often a burst of high frequency gamma wave activity in the right temporal lobe of the brain.
Okay.
This suggests that new neural connections are rapidly being formed. And interestingly, this moment of insight is often preceded by a period of slower alpha wave activity, suggesting that the brain is kind of quieting down distracting information, making space for those novel connections to occur.
So it's almost like the brain needs to quiet all the background noise to allow that sudden ping of understanding to come through.
Precisely. It really supports the idea that sometimes stepping away from actively trying to force a solution to a problem or a creative block can actually create the mental space for that insight to emerge naturally.
There's also an exercise suggested for connecting your feelings and physical sensations directly to imagery, drawing a very simple figure and then adding an image that represents a physical sensation you're experiencing, like maybe a flaming heart if you have heartburn. That's a very embodied approach.
It is. It's about recognizing the deep interconnectedness of our physical body, our emotions, and our imaginative selves. By consciously linking a physical sensation with a visual image, you can tap into deeper layers of your experience and potentially gain new insights into the emotional roots of those physical sensations.
The sources then discuss the importance of learning to let go and overcoming excessive self-control, which can actually become a hindrance to the creative process. The analogy they use of learning to swim, that relaxing and being receptive, is much more effective than panicking and trying to control every movement, is really clear.
It perfectly highlights the importance of trust and surrender in the creative process, doesn't it? That strong urge to control every single aspect of what you're creating can actually stifle the spontaneity and the natural flow. The Buddhist concept of samadhi, that state of effortless concentration where the outside world just fades away, really encapsulates that ideal of being fully present in the moment of creation without striving or forcing anything.
And they touch on this interesting paradox of students often having very high expectations for themselves, while at the same time being incredibly self-critical and harboring a deep fear of making mistakes. That's a really common struggle, isn't it?
Absolutely. Those high expectations can create immense pressure, which in turn makes it much more difficult to take creative risks and to embrace the messy and often unpredictable nature of the creative process. The sources emphasize the value of taking small steps, seeing each mark you make on the page as a bridge to the next, and really letting go of that need for immediate perfection in everything you do.
Group exercises and shared creativity are also mentioned as valuable tools. That free drawing exercise where people add to each other's drawings sounds like a really effective way to build a sense of
Oh.
safety and to encourage that feeling that there are truly no mistakes in this context.
It is. It creates a shared experience where the individual pressure to create something good all on your own is lessened. It really fosters collaboration, spontaneity, and a deeper understanding that there are truly no mistakes when you're exploring together in this way. The anecdotes they share from that corporate workshop, John reading poetry, Susan's family tree pun, Marion's act of rebellion, really illustrate the wide range of reactions and the unexpected insights that can emerge when you're creating in a group setting.
Now, the idea of the overprotective amygdala, that emotional brain and its automatic fight, flight, or freeze response, how does this relate back to our creative process and those feelings of being blocked?
Well, the amygdala's primary job is to constantly scan our environment for any signs of danger. When it perceives a threat, and in the context of creativity, that perceived threat could be the fear of being judged, the fear of failure, or just the vulnerability that comes with expressing something personal,
Right.
it instantly triggers that automatic stress response.
Mhm.
And because the cells in our limbic system, including the amygdala, don't fully mature over time like other parts of our brain, these very primal fear mechanisms can be easily triggered, leading to those feelings of creative block.
So that feeling of just freezing up when you're facing a blank page or a challenging creative task could actually be your amygdala going into a kind of overdrive.
It's definitely a significant contributing factor. The sources highlight that we are fundamentally feeling beings who also know how to think. And often our creative inhibitions have deep roots in past experiences and ingrained fears, even if we're not consciously aware of them in the moment.
The discussion then shifts to drawing people, but with a strong emphasis on moving beyond the need for realistic representation. They specifically suggest starting with very simple stick figures as a way to overcome inhibitions about portraying the human form.
Exactly. The main goal here isn't to create anatomically perfect portraits, but rather to use simple visual forms to express feelings, to tell stories, and to connect with your own inner world. The story they share about Marielle drawing figures at a train station as a way to cope with feelings of sadness is a beautiful example of this.
Yeah, that was lovely.
Using simple visual expression to process and even transform difficult emotions. It's about giving yourself permission to be basic, to not let that inner critic demand perfection, even in the most rudimentary of drawings.
And then they introduced Carl Jung's concept of archetypal imagery, this idea of a kind of psychic DNA made up of universal images, behaviors, and ways of perceiving the world.
How do these archetypes tend to show up in art journaling? Jung believed that these archetypes, figures like the child, the great mother, the hero, the trickster, the wise old man, are part of our collective unconscious, a shared reservoir of human experience. They represent fundamental patterns of human experience and behavior that transcend individual differences. Art journaling, as a form of dialogue between your conscious and unconscious mind, can allow these archetypal images to surface in your artwork, offering you insights into your deepest motivations and experiences.
And these archetypes aren't always the traditionally good or positive figures, right? They can also include the darker or more challenging aspects of human nature that we might naturally tend to resist confronting.
Precisely. Jung recognized that what he called the shadow aspects, those parts of ourselves that we tend to deny or repress, are also a very real and important part of our overall psyche. The author's own experience of drawing a beautiful figure that then unexpectedly transformed into something quite repulsive really highlights the importance of acknowledging these so-called darker aspects. It's often through confronting these uncomfortable images that we can gain a greater and more integrated understanding of ourselves.
This idea of encountering these archetypes seems closely related to Jung's technique of active imagination, which uses mental imagery and narrative to intentionally engage with the content of your unconscious mind. It sounds like art journaling can be a very direct and tangible form of active imagination right there on the paper.
Absolutely. By allowing images to emerge spontaneously in your journal and then actively engaging with them through drawing, coloring, and even by, asking them questions, you're essentially engaging in a visual dialogue with your unconscious, bringing those hidden aspects of yourself into conscious awareness.
The conversation then draws a connection between our emotions and these archetypes, using Jack Panksepp's framework of 7 primal emotional systems, things like seeking, rage, fear, play, and how they might align with different Jungian archetypes.
This provides a really interesting framework for understanding the deeper emotional roots of the images that appear in our art journals. For example, Panksepp's care emotional system might align with the great mother archetype and the play system with the child archetype. It also points out the amygdala's direct involvement in emotions like rage and fear, potentially linking those to archetypes like the warrior figure of Kali. It's a way of seeing both the biological and the psychological underpinnings of these very universal human patterns.
This naturally leads into suggesting exercises for actually engaging with those monsters or fears that might come up, drawing them out, giving them exaggerated features. Another really direct way of confronting and potentially disarming those inner critics and anxieties.
Exactly. By giving a physical form to your fears and anxieties on the page, you're externalizing them, making them feel less abstract and perhaps more manageable. It's a way of taking some of their power away. The suggestion to draw precisely what you don't want to draw is also a very powerful technique for confronting your creative resistance head-on.
There's also a guided return to the cave exercise, a visualization that you follow, and then draw the treasures you find within, with the instruction not to worry about things like perspective. That sounds like a really lovely and gentle way to tap into your inner resources.
It's designed as a symbolic journey into the deeper parts of your own psyche, a way to access hidden wisdom and potential that can be represented by the treasures you discover in your inner cave. The instruction not to worry about perspective really emphasizes the internal imaginative nature of the exercise.
And then this wonderful suggestion to actually talk to the objects that appear in your artwork, imagining the stories they might have to tell. That's such a creative way to deepen your engagement with your own creations.
It really animates the artwork, doesn't it? Turning what might seem like static images into potential narrators and storytellers. It encourages you to go beyond just the surface level and consider the deeper meanings and associations that these objects might hold for you.
The importance of just getting started and really embracing the inherent risks involved in creating is reiterated with an acknowledgement of those very common fears, like ruining the drawing or looking foolish. It's a good reminder that making progress often involves a degree of vulnerability.
Yes, getting started is often the most challenging part, isn't it? Acknowledging those fears is really the first and most important step in learning to overcome them. The sources encourage you to take those small creative risks, recognizing that each act of creation, even if it feels imperfect, ultimately paves the way for future exploration and growth.
The discussion then turns to address the discomfort that some students might feel when darker or more unsettling imagery comes up in their art journaling, referencing the original, often much grittier versions of classic fairy tales, and the idea that archetypes like Baba Yaga embody both danger and wisdom. Why is it so important to acknowledge these potentially unsettling images when they appear?
It's about normalizing the full spectrum of human experience, really. The darker elements in fairy tales and the more challenging aspects of archetypes reflect the inherent complexities of our own inner world, including our fears, our aggressions, and our shadow selves. Actively resisting these kinds of images when they appear can actually keep them stuck in our unconscious. By acknowledging them in your art journal, you can begin to understand and ultimately integrate these often hidden parts of yourself.
And then the incredibly important role of the healing power of humor is highlighted, with a direct connection made between creativity, the act of making connections, and laughter itself. The example of the Greek myth of Demeter and Persephone and the unexpected act of the goddess Baubo breaking Demeter's profound grief. That's a really powerful and quite surprising example of the power of humor.
It truly is. Humor can be an incredibly powerful disruptor of emotional blocks. It allows us to see things from a completely different perspective, to release tension that we might not even be aware of, and to connect with both ourselves and others in a much more lighthearted way. The brain research they mentioned showing that laughter actually activates pleasure centers and releases dopamine really reinforces its profoundly positive impact on our creative process and on our overall well-being.
The crucial art of not knowing is also discussed specifically, the potential advantage that individuals without formal art training might actually have because they aren't bound by a set of pre-existing rules and can often see things in a completely new way. It encourages really questioning that inner critic and accepting that the meaning of a drawing might not always be immediately clear or even logical. That sounds incredibly liberating.
It really is. Sometimes our own preconceived notions and rigid expectations can actually be the very things that limit our creativity. Embracing that state of not knowing allows for a much more open and uninhibited exploration and the potential for truly unexpected discoveries. The meaning of what you create might emerge later, or it might simply be about the experience of the process itself.
More fascinating brain research is shared, this time focusing specifically on humor and insight, highlighting the involvement of the brain's reward centers and the release of dopamine, suggesting that those aha moments of insight are actually more likely to occur when you're in a positive mood. So the message seems to be don't take your art journaling too seriously, find the fun in it.
Exactly. Allowing yourself to have fun with the process, to find humor in what emerges, can actually prime your brain for those moments of insight. It helps to create a more relaxed and receptive state of mind.
They then introduce an interesting exercise called the outer self and inner self exercise, using two ovals drawn side by side to explore the contrast between the persona we present to the outside world and our often hidden inner feelings. That sounds like a very insightful way to tap into those deeper layers of self.
It's a very visual way to explore the different masks we wear and the feelings that we often keep private. Drawing direct inspiration from Jung's idea of the persona, it encourages a deeper understanding of the different facets of our own identity and the potential disconnect that can exist between our inner and outer worlds. There's also another one mentioned, filling a container with the garbage of one's life, like worries or frustrations, as another way to process negativity visually.
Right, getting it out onto the page. And finally, the often tricky question of knowing when a piece of art journaling is actually done. The sources acknowledge that there aren't any strict rules and really emphasize the importance of your own initial intention when you started the page.
Yeah, that's a tough one sometimes. It really comes down to trusting your own intuition and being mindful of what your intention was when you first started working on that particular page. The urge to abandon drawings that feel unpleasant or challenging is a natural one, but often pushing through those feelings can lead to really important insights or the continuation of a story that needs to be told.
Like those anecdotes they shared about Carla being stuck and the image of a boot stomping in the mud breaking through, or the author adding more fish to her clown drawing to resolve it.
Exactly. Those unexpected actions can signal either completion or maybe the need for further exploration. It's not always logical.
The incredible adaptability of the brain, neuroplasticity, is briefly mentioned as a powerful reminder of our innate capacity for change and continued growth. And the absolutely crucial role of asking yourself the right kinds of questions throughout this entire process is reiterated.
Asking thoughtful and open-ended questions is really the engine that drives this technique, isn't it? It's what helps you to move forward when you feel stuck, to identify underlying blocks, and to clarify your own intentions and the meanings that emerge. It's a very active engagement with your own creative and internal process.
The sources then offer a collection of really practical exercises for continued exploration, simply drawing lines in different ways, the mysterious journey exercise using a map for inspiration, energized drawing for those times when you feel really stuck, and some additional prompts like the shape of fear and cosmic egg. It's a fantastic wealth of ideas to keep the art journaling flowing.
These exercises are all specifically designed to encourage experimentation, to help you break out of any habitual patterns, and to continue that ongoing journey of self-discovery through your own unique visual expression. They offer a variety of different ways to engage with that blank page and to tap into the rich resources of your inner world.
So to really sum it all up, this deep dive into the world of art journaling for self-discovery has really highlighted that it's a very personal journey, one that's truly accessible to everyone, no matter what your perceived level of artistic skill might be. It's fundamentally about embracing the process, not just focusing on the final product, learning to quiet that often critical inner voice, and staying open to whatever unexpected images and emotions might emerge on the page.
Exactly. It's about giving yourself permission to play, to experiment without judgment, and to really trust the inherent wisdom that can surface through your own unique visual language.
So, whether you're thinking about dusting off an old sketchbook that's been sitting on a shelf, or maybe picking up a pen for the very first time with this in mind, perhaps take a moment to consider what surprising and unexpected landscapes might begin to emerge in your own personal deep dive. Thanks so much for joining us.